towards freeholder and freeholder alike. It was no true feast, for Valyrians did not feast. That was an Andal thing, a thing of the first men, a Westerosi thing, where thousands might sit in attendance and have near 100 plates a person, sampling once with their forks and guzzling wine as though it were water. Valyrian banquets were smaller fare, some 24 guests, but more intimate for it, more friendly, filled with discussion and debate rather than senseless drinking, with but a few courses intended to be eaten utterly rather than merely sampled, a legacy of the days before Valyria was a city, before the freehold, when they were simply shepherds on the slopes of the 14 Flames, where every meal was to be treasured. But let none say that they did not put care into their cookery. This dinner was a dinner of 4 courses, and each and every one was cooked to perfection. A beet soup, served cool, as thick and rich as violet honey and served with a glass of spiced wine hot enough to steam. A fish, carefully filleted to remove any bones and scales and fried on a pan with olive oil and served with a sauce of garlic and wine and lime juice, accompanied by dumplings and roasted carrots. The ancestral and iconic Valyrian fire pudding of raisins and sultanas and other fruits and suet, brought forth and set ablaze at the table, as brilliant a spectacle now as it had been millennia before when it was first concocted. Through all 3 courses they had spoken about all manner of things, the weather, the city, how life had been in Westeros and other casual topics, but when the last plates were taken away by Lena's cook-servant, when they returned with a platter of cheeses and crackers and fruit, the conversation came alive proper. And it was far more serious than the simpler talk of before. "So, how did you find yourselves on the way to Volantis?" Lena asked, curious. "It isn't every day that a Targaryen makes their way to the city. The good Illyrio Mapatis in Pentos had taken us in, and it was his help that brought us here," Viserys said, looking to his sister with a smile before returning his attentions to their Volanten host. "If it weren't for him, we would surely still be there." "Illyrio? The cheesemonger?" "Truly?" Lena asked before laughing. "I thought whatever goodwill he had died with that wife of his." "You knew the Magister?" "Lena knows a lot of Magisters around Essos," Tivette said before the woman might answer. "Her father was of the Elephants, the faction of merchantmen in the city, and so she inherited his fleet." "More than just his fleet," the Volanten smiled. "His warehouses, his workshops, his reserved piers, why, everything a woman with a fleet of 49 merchant ships might want. And before anyone asks, I make my coin from cloth on the triangle trade." "The what?" Daenerys asked. "I think that might be the phrase for it in the common tongue." Lena asked, thinking before shaking her head. "It's called the Ha with Macron Ae Celts in High Valyrian. It's a trade route with 3 stops. You start here in Volantis, picking up dye. Volantis was always a big producer of dye, even before the last of the Rhoynish Wars. Then you sail northwards, all the way up to Lorath and sell that dye and buy velvet. Lorath velvet is the softest anywhere. Then you go through the canal in the neck, then past Lannisport to Old Town and sell the velvet there, since the Reachmen love nice clothes. Then they buy glass from there and bring it here." "Wouldn't it be better to buy the glass at Myr?" his sister asked. "They are famous for their lenses." "They are, and it would be," Lena said, before innocently continuing. "They are just not very fond of us Volantens, seeing how we've been killing each other since the Doom." "Always pleasant times in Essos," Tivette japed, the Northam alongside him laughing in his cup. "Well, if you're so comfortable and happy here, why don't you explain to your good king why you were banished from one of the free cities?" Lena asked Tivette, her smile looking more at home on a snake. "Go on." "It's not nearly as bad as it sounds," Tivette answered with Lannister cunning and Lannister deftness. "It was just a misunderstanding, honest." "I know what your misunderstandings are like," Tyg Brandon laughed, cup in one hand and bread in the other. "How many men died?" 100. Tigaris laughed, the young boy chewing on a cracker as he did. "None," the Lannister objected. "One," Lena Loris corrected in an instant. "My dearest husband, may he rest in peace." "Or not. Say what you will about Westeros, they at least figured out that burying bodies might be better for giving the dead some peace than throwing them into a bonfire." "He wasn't your husband," Tivette countered. "And I didn't kill him." "Barely anyone didn't believe you then, and even less believe you now." Lena laughed. "Why don't you give Viserys and his wife the full story? What harm is there in it all?" "Fine," Tivette sighed, taking a long sip of wine, before starting. It was a couple of years ago. Actually, just shy of 5 years, Lena corrected, before smiling at the Lannister. Every time you're not honest, I'll say something. Fine, have it your way, Tijet continued. Me and Brandon, and a few others, before Lena says anything, had been hired by some of the old blood to come within the Black Walls, serve as guardsmen. Hired killers, Lena corrected again. A little, but most of the work we did was protecting against hired killers and protecting tables full of important papers that would be very unfortunate to end up in others' hands. Tijet nodded. Lena was a special case. See, West AOC and Valyrian law is different. West AOC law comes from the Andals, which is why you can have a trial by combat anywhere in the realms. That one snuck everywhere, even into the north. Because Andals really wanted excuses to kill each other, because, oh, did they enjoy a good fight, Lena murmured before shrugging. Probably why they got crushed by the Freehold. Wasn't fun fighting each other, so they wanted to fight someone stronger, see how fun it would be. Valyria gave them a proper fight, by which I mean it put thousands of them 7 foot underground and made the survivors their Kaipar. Their ride, Viserys knew. It wasn't proper High Valyrian, but given the context it didn't need to be. Anyway, Tijet continued, insistent. One thing that was the same is that inheritance can be done by conditions, like. The Lannister paused, snapping his fingers as he thought of an example. Rohan Weber. She wasn't allowed to inherit Cold Moat if she wasn't wed within 2 years of her father's death, and the same thing happened with Lena, except she had to have a baby within 3 years of her father's death, as she was the only Lorys left. You can tell how that went, Lena said, eyeing her son sideways, the young boy utterly unaware as he played with his food. To help encourage her, Lena had an arranged marriage, Tijet explained, choosing his words carefully whilst his son was in earshot. Of course, Lena and I were already together, so it was sort of redundant, but the marriage was arranged, only her father's choice in groom was, well. Have you ever felt like you've met someone who just felt like, say, half a person? Lena asked Viserys. My betrothed was that. Honestly, I never thought I could find a man so boring, Tijet sighed. I swear, it was like he had taken a blow to the head and half of him died and the rest just limped on. He had no interests about anything. He didn't like anything. He didn't dislike anything. He was just there, like one of those fake trees in a halfpenny mama's show. Brandon burst into laughter. He wasn't that bad, he was just the dull sort, Lena reasoned, more serious and more quiet. Probably didn't know much about how to make friends. You find one of those every once in a while. Mayhaps that was why my father chose him. What happened to him? Viserys asked, his sister wife looking over curiously towards Lena. Tijet killed him, Lena said simply, with no more than a shrug of his shoulders. Tijet killed him, Brandon agreed by instinct. Tijet killed him, Tigaris echoed, thoughtless as he played with his food. Tijet sighed. I didn't kill him, he said quietly. It was an accident. Honest. See, my dear husband, or betrothed to use your West AOC word for it, went out into the city for drinks with Tyg, Lena explained to the prince. Only he didn't come back. Not alive, anyway. I knew that once the two of them were married, Lena and I wouldn't be able to keep together. Tijet took over, Lena smiling as she listened to his honest words. To show her future husband that I wasn't a threat to him, I decided to go out into the city with him, celebrate our new friendship with some wine, show that I had no hate for him marrying her. He might have been a dullard when he was sober, but put a cup of wine in his hand, and he'd have outfeasted even my brother Geryon. A hand on every girl's hip, 2 cups of wine in every round, a cake from every plate. The Lannister trailed off, Lena meeting his green eyes with her violet own before Tijet cleared his throat and spoke his innocent words. The only problem was. He started, Lena crossing her arms in front of him. Well, he died. Because you killed him, Lena smiled. Isn't that right, Tigaris? Yep, the young boy piped eagerly. I didn't kill him, Tijet said again. He drank so much wine and ate so quickly that he threw up, but he was still upright in the chair, so he couldn't breathe. But everyone else was dancing, so none of us noticed, so he drowned. Mayhaps the first time a man drowned on dry land, Brandon smiled, laughing into his wine again. his eagle resting at the windowsill and pecking away at a small mouse it had caught between courses. This meant Tivette drew the attentions of the Tiger Cloaks, who passed him over to the guards at the Black Walls, saying he had killed a member of the Old Blood. Lena started, smiling. That lead to a trial, because in Volantis, you have to be proven guilty to be punished, just like in Valyria. Let no man be destroyed or punished, except by the lawful judgment of his peers, she quoted with a rare formal voice. There was just one small problem. They weren't sure how it could have happened, Tivette mumbled with a shrug of his shoulders. Everyone thought I had killed him, but they couldn't put the pieces together how I had done it, or how he had died without anyone knowing. Everyone knew I could have done it, everyone knew I had reason to, they just didn't know how I could have done it, because everyone who was there saw that I hadn't put anything in his drink or anything like that, and that they had seen him eating and drinking and playing around in his own right. And without that one little how, they couldn't give this good, honest lion any punishment. Lena laughed. It took 6 months for them to finally give up and say he was innocent, even if they didn't think he was. I was innocent, that's why. Tivette smiled back, seeming ready to laugh at the madness of it all. Didn't stop them from finding something else I was guilty of. What? Viserys asked, wearing a smile of his own. Contempt of court. The lion shrugged again, reaching out to pluck a fat red grape from its bundle. Apparently asking to read through their own code's laws is a crime. That isn't what happened. Lena started with a smirk. You were ordered to remain in the care of the guards until such time as you had been proven innocent or guilty, but negotiated to stay under house arrest so long as you stayed quiet, did nothing wrong and didn't stay out after dark. That got you sent here, unable to leave the grounds without prior permission and a properly filled out form. That would have been fine, if you didn't ask to read the laws. They were available to read, Tivette answered innocently as he popped the fruit into his mouth. And I had that right. You even said it yourself. The original copies, Lena said, arms crossed knowingly. Written in High Valyrian. GLYPHS, not script. I can read High Valyrian. Tivette nodded before swallowing. Well, a little. That was Gerion's thing. West AOC girls love the sound of it. Copies which are stored in the archives beneath the Free Hall, Lena said at last. Which need the permission of 2 out of 3 of the triacs to be opened, which you asked for, when 2 out of 3 of the triacs were out of the city. Penamion was at Astapa to discuss trade, and Laerion was leading an army on exercises and was not to be disturbed, which left behind Magai, who was still fuming that his daughter Talisa had ran off to West Aos or wherever she went. There was nothing in the laws that said I couldn't, Tivette defended. How was I supposed to know it would get me thrown out the Black Walls? You did that to yourself. Lena laughed before looking towards Viserys to explain. You see, for Tivette to visit the archives, he would need to get permission to leave the place he stayed, my manse, and then be escorted by the guards to the Free Hall, which because he was under arrest at the time meant would be defined as his house. How does that work? Daenerys asked, confused and quiet. It's complicated, but a lot easier to explain in High Valyrian instead of the common tongue, Lena admitted. But to put it short, when he left my manse, he was placed under the care of the guards again until he reached the archive, but they wouldn't let him in because he didn't have permission from the triacs, who weren't around to give him permission or not. That means that they couldn't take him in there, but they couldn't turn him away either, so they would have to bring him back here, but they couldn't because he had signed a form saying he wouldn't be allowed to return to the manse until he had been allowed to examine the texts or been denied. But the guards couldn't keep him because he had been placed into your care. Viserys finished, understanding. So he couldn't be held by the guards, he couldn't come here, and he couldn't go to the library. What then? Well, Valyrian law says that a man being held must be held in a place suitable for their confinement, Lena explained once more, raising her hand and counting fingers. 1. He couldn't be held by the guards. 2. He couldn't be held here. 3. He couldn't be held at the library. 4. He can't be held within the city, because he is to be detained. 5. He can't be held outside because he has to be contained somewhere, so they threw him out. Daenerys asked. They threw him out, Lena nodded, before looking towards Tivette with knowing eyes as the Lannister laughed. That means that TYG here killed my dearest husband, then got away with it by making a mockery of the law. And Tywin thought he was the only one of us Lannisters with wits, Tivette murmured with a quiet, rumbling laugh. The last triarch in the city thus declared he was guilty of mocking the courts, which he was by trying to tie them in knots, and sentenced him to exile, at least until the first matter was solved, which it was by finding him innocent, but even if they hadn't he was already miles away. Lena finished. And that's why the guards can't stand Tiget and his noble, honest Lannister ways. There was the soft ringing of a fist against the door, tapping carefully and regularly, but with no little strength. For a moment, Viserys thought Lena might ignore it or send one of her house servants to deal with the matter or even go to the door herself, greeting whoever did it for herself to see what they might do. Instead, "Come in," she shouted. "The latch isn't done." The man simply opened the door himself, the door lacking anything but the simplest, lightest of locks. Viserys could barely imagine the house of a pauper with so little in the name of protections for its door, and yet there it was, no more than a chain to be fastened into place whenever they chose not to let a guest in. He almost couldn't believe what he saw with his own two eyes. Even in Westeros, even in the reign of his father, even before the war, there had not been such a confidence in one's own safety and security as there was here in Volantis, within the Black Walls, where guards patrolled often and met men and women not with clubs and curses, but careful hands and calming words, escorting them back to their homes to be sure they were safe rather than throwing them in some side alley to sober. Even Volantis outside the walls wasn't like that. The man that stepped through was not one he knew, yet he had the blood of a Valyrian and all the looks that came with it, silver hair that flowed straight, violet eyes, sharp-cheeked, an air of somber melancholy that hung in the air like the echo of a realm destroyed. He could have seen himself in a mirror and described himself with those words as easily as he might describe the man before him now, but the difference between the two was in the details and most of all in the clothes. Where Viserys was in the blacks and reds of his house, the man before him was in blacks and oranges and whites, striped and rippling from head to heel in the colors of the tigers that ruled the great city. "Forgive my intrusion, Tigress," the man said, giving her a slight bow as if in fealty. He recognized that voice. This was Rhaegon, who had welcomed him into the city in the first place. "I came to inquire as to whether or not the Targaryen had yet to make a request for the Triarchy's graces." "Tigress?" Tiget asked quietly, surprised. "I thought you weren't interested in politicking." Lena smirked in answer, sipping her wine. "Times change," she answered the Lannister before looking towards Rhaegon, switching into a more practiced, almost regal tone. "I am afraid they have yet to do so, good free citizen Mujeres. Still, I am well aware that they would not be allowed to remain within the Black Walls past 2 weeks without their blessings. Would you do me the kindness of escorting the Targaryen, Viserys, to the Free Hall?" "But of course, good lady," assuming he is ready to go, the guard asked, looking towards Viserys. "We have already finished, so I imagine he is," Lena answered deftly, her switch from host to politician as swift and perfect as a change in clothes. "Still, would you do me the further kindness of finding out the list of tomorrow's appointments? I wouldn't want to arrive unprepared. I imagine it will involve a certain liaison matter, good Tigress, but I will be happy to bring you a proper list," he said again, different. Was Tigress a rank, mayhaps? Some statement as to her wealth? He knew the Tigers were a faction in the Volantin Freehold, a great group of more aggressively minded individuals who would see Volantis draw its sword and take its place atop of Essos once more, but he knew little more about the Tigers than that. Regardless, he rose from his seat, tapping his sister gently on the shoulder as she looked to him with the concerned eyes of a girl who had never long been apart from him and never once been comfortable without his protections. "Thank you." Lena smiled at the guard before looking towards the elder Targaryen, relaxing again to casualness once more. "Don't worry, your sister will be safe here." "Promise me, Viserys," his mother whispered, her words as quiet and cold as they had been when they were first uttered. "Promise me." They were a mother's words, filled with a mother's love, the words of a mother giving her last son a mission. "Look after her. Keep her safe. Raise her the way that R'hllor might have done so. Look after her. Keep her safe." "I would rather she came with me," Viserys insisted, extending a gentle hand towards his sister to help her from her seat. "I think it best I stay here," was Daenerys' reply, his sister uncomfortable one moment and then comfortable in the next, well and then sickly, tired then well, all in terms that would have made any woman nauseous. I don't feel so well." "I will keep an eye on her," Your Grace," Tiget said to the Targaryen king. "She'll be safe." Viserys narrowed his eyes. He hated the idea of leaving her on her own. That was something that he had never done. He had never gone far from her, never allowed her to stray from his sight. It would be a challenge to leave her behind long enough for him to make it down the road and past the length of a man's or two, yet alone to travel around a city without her nearby. And yet, weren't they right? This was mayhaps the safest city in the world for her, safer even than Dragonstone would have been. The black walls were beyond even the usurper's reach, beyond the tip of any blade he may have hired to hunt for him or his sister, and it was with men sworn to him that she would be left. Surely she would be safe with them, he tried to convince himself. It is safer here than it was at Illyrio's manse, so surely she will be safe here. Very well, he accepted, his outstretched hand turning to an affectionate pat on his sister-wife's shoulder, Daenerys looking to him with a tired smile. You will be safe here with them, but mayhaps you should get some rest, sweet sister. The journey from Pentos was a long one. I think I will, his sister answered, almost yawning. I've been so tired. She didn't even get a chance to answer before he kissed her hair. A queen needn't give anyone a reason for the things she does, wife. If you wish to rest, rest. Daenerys looked back at him with surprise in answer to his words, but nodded happily enough as she started to rise from her seat. Ever since they had wed, he had done his part to make sure she would be a fitting queen, treating her exactly the way that Rolla had been treated by their father, courteously, gently, giving her the freedom of a woman wed and taking her counsel in all things. That was the way it had been for his own mother and his own father, for a king and a queen were meant to rule together, two sides of the same crown, for just as a lord might have a hard and heavy hand to keep the lands given to him orderly and safe, to honor his vows of fealty, so did his lady wife rule the household and was looked to as the soft figure of care and compassion. If a king was truly father of the realm, then a queen was to be its mother, and whilst a mother should be loving and gentle and caring, she should also be firm and not afraid to say things as she saw them to be, something new for his sister, yet something she was quickly learning to do. Let her stay the soft queen, he thought to himself, half a prayer and half a hope. Let me be the hard one. I care not what the maesters think of me, so long as they see Daenerys as she truly is. With that, he turned towards Rhaegar, nodding and accepting his offer of escort without so much as a word as he stepped over to his side, giving his sister one last wave before following him out the door and out onto the city's streets once more, streets that stood beneath the grey skies of coming night, lit with the warm glow of slowly simmering oil lamps, placed rarely to avoid breaking the beautiful look of the city, yet shining brightly for all to see. They were one of the youngest additions to the city, clear in how they were made, not of the seamless stone of the black walls, but of dark masonry that was made to look as though it was, just as the long bridge was, the seams between bricks filled with mortar and smoothed over and painted black, but for all their youth, they lit the streets well enough that not for even a moment did the Targaryen grow concerned about losing his way, about getting lost in the great city, or about being leapt at from the alleys by a footpad with a knife in hand. That was the greatest triumph of all, for not even for a moment did the Targaryen feel as though he might be in danger, as if there might be a risk on the streets. The streets were calm and ordered, with what few people they passed, Volantens all, passing with as little interest in them as Viserys might have gave them in return, three-man parties of guardsmen passing every once in a while followed by a fourth with a barrel, ready to refill the lamps. There were no brigands hiding in the shadows here, no cutthroats simply waiting for their opening to strike, no assassins hired by Baratheon gold to put an end to the last of the Targaryens. There was nothing but peace everywhere he looked, a tranquility that remained even as they passed out of the streets that were covered in manses to the streets of the more common people of the city within the city, where the houses grew smaller and grew to share walls, streets that were as orderly as those of the wealthy. He wasn't sure how long he had walked for before he reached them, or the old craftsman districts past them, districts that seemed to be slowly rousing after centuries of abandonment, with the largest of carpentry stores being home to half-built tray buckets and catapults and scorpions and all the other things that took true, honest skill at sums to create. There were bakeries, clothiers, apothecaries, every trade that could be found under the sun, the working heart of a city within a city, yet even the humblest of them all stood proud in comparison to the stores of King's Landing as he remembered them, neatly built and neatly arrayed, yet near enough half of them looked all but deserted. Most of the tradesmen moved their workshops to the outer city, Rhaegar explained, knowing what Viserys would ask before he had the chance to. It is easier for them to meet with the merchants of the port that way, and there are few doubts about how it gets them more customers. Still, the most important trades can be found within the walls still. Such as siege engineers. Viserys asked, offhandedly and regretting it the moment the words left his mouth. Exactly so, the Volunten answered, taking no slight from his words. The black walls were not made by hands, but forged with spells by sorcerers who made the rock itself flow like water, much as they did your dragonstone. There is no weapon in the world that might breach them, nor any timber strong enough to hold up a siege tower high enough to reach their summit. They are utterly impregnable. More, the very layout of the battlements themselves render them impossible to storm by even the strongest army. Though you may not see it from the distance, the inner city of Old Volantis is a city shaped like a star. This is because the city itself was first built as a fortress by Valyria herself, and all Valyrian fortresses had that shape, and not simply to honor the 14 who had blessed the Valyrians of old in every way they might give them their blessing. How come? It is ingeniously simple, Rhaegar smiled. With the walls and towers arranged in such ways, you turn the spaces between the stars' points into killing fields. A man pressing up against a square wall must worry only about being hit by arrows from the front. A man pressing up against the black walls must worry about being struck from the front, the left and the right all at once, and those are walls bristling with weapons, both obvious and not. The workshops are inside the walls, so any attacker would not be able to destroy them and prevent the defenders from maintaining their weapons. There is a reason, good Targrio, why Volantis has never fallen to an assault before, the captain of the Black Walls said with a quiet laugh. This city sat on mayhaps the most important place in the freehold, for it was the one and only way south to the freehold from the west. The fortifications here are the strongest they ever built, for Valyria's own walls were dragons. But what about from the sea? Viserys asked as they continued their way through to the end of the Craftsman's Street, coming towards the end of the Dragon Road. Could an attacker not come from the southern side? The Valyrians had the sense to seal the walls on that side, for they knew the Rhoynar were skilled sailors, Rhaegar reasoned. There is not a side from which the city is not covered by defenses, and the sea is mayhaps the strongest of them all. The Volanten fleet danced with that of Myr, Lys and Tioche and held all three at bay even after they sent 200 ships to vanish in what you might now call the Smoking Sea. It was only when Braavos, Pentos, the Stormlands and your own forefather, Aegon Targaryen, entered the fray that they were overwhelmed. Viserys was quiet in response to the mention of that last name. Aegon Targaryen, and not just any Aegon. Aegon the Dragon. Aegon the Kingburner. Aegon the Conqueror. The Volantens had offered to give him command of their forces, some 300 years ago, to take his place as a Dragon Lord of an entirely new freehold. Volantis had been unstoppable. City after city had fallen before their armies, and even the West AOC had quaked with the news of their ceaseless victories, so concerned about the happenings that the Storm King himself mustered his forces to come to the aid of the free cities as part of a grand alliance to foil Volanten ambition. Had Aegon done so, he would have been welcomed by the Volantens with all the respect that his position would have afforded him. The Stormlanders would have drowned in the narrow sea, their transports intercepted and lit by dragon flame. Myr and Lys and Tioche would have been crushed, Pentos cowed into submission, Norphos and Qohor routed and the Giscari subjugated. Even mighty Braavos would have been isolated and embargoed and starved into defeat. And Volantis would have won. The city would stand dominant over all of Essos west of the Bone Mountains, and House Targaryen would never have gone across the narrow sea to land in the Blackwater Bay. The Seven Kingdoms would never have been united, and the free cities would have instead been welded into a single realm once more, the envy of all the world. Aegon did not do such things. Aegon did not even stand neutral. Aegon joined the invasion force against them, atop of Balerion the Black Dread, leaving his sisters behind. The reasoning was their own. The actions were for all to see as Dragonfire consumed Volanten Mentins and laid waste to their fleets. That was the mortal blow, Viserys knew. What hope did the Volantens have to restore the freehold, when its very greatest symbol had turned its back on them? When the armies that had once marched in the shadow of dragon wings now found themselves fighting against them? It was not merely a blow on the battlefield, it was a crushing, fatal wound to their morale, to their spirit to make war. It would be as if Huger of the Hill had came from the dead to lead the Northmen against the Vale of Arryn during one of their many wars. It was the single greatest cause for their downfall, and it would be the single greatest challenge he would have to face here. How could it not be, when it was directly the fault of House Targaryen that the Volantens lost the war. The Triacs will want an explanation, he thought to himself, swallowing hard. But if I mention how we Targaryens aided them again and again afterwards, mayhaps that will help. Desperate to clutch at anything that might take his mind off of the matter, off of the grim odds ahead, Viserys leapt at the change of surroundings that came as they emerged out of the place of craftsmen and into an open plaza where all the main arteries of the city might meet in its beating heart. Yet it was an empty place, utterly devoid of stalls, utterly devoid of anything but benches, sculptures of black slate and a three-tiered fountain in the midst, made in the shape of a 14-sided star and spritzing away to all crowds that were no longer there. What was this area for? A meeting place. A place of entertainment. Part of the city's commons. A mere centerpiece for the gardens all around. Is this a market? Viserys asked, as interested in finding out as he was in changing the topic. I thought most merchants made their stalls on the Long Bridge. They do, for Volantis is a city within a city, his escort explained to him, caring not for the words he had spoke before. There is New Volantis, the city past the Black Walls, but in here you have the city within, Old Volantis, True Volantis, standing just as the Valyrians had built it. This is where the original 14 roads of the city meet, just as they did in Old Valyria centuries before. Few merchants come here now, as most prefer to sell their wares on the Long Bridge, Rhaegar continued. But some still will. We Volantens are proud of our heritage, so merchants with Valyrian things often come here to sell them, knowing that the old blood and even the Triacs themselves will spend fortunes to own a piece of their past. A thought occurred to him, then, nudging at him from the recesses of his mind. Were the Targaryens themselves not a piece of Valyria's history? Of all the families left alive in the world, only they could truly claim to not only be freeholders, but Lords Freeholder, the greatest holders of Valyria's wealth and might and the masters and mistresses of dragons. Could things belonging to his line have made its way to this market square at some point? Might he walk into a Triaca's home and see black fur sat upon a mantle, pried from the hands of a man of the Golden Company and sold as a piece of Valyrian history? Mayhaps he might even find himself staring down Balerion the Black Dread's empty eye sockets, the usurper selling the skull and the rest of the great dragon's remains to whoever might have the interest in buying it. It was a bitter thought to think that the property of a proud house, his house, might be treated in such a manner. The captain of the Black Wall saw it in his eyes, and spoke once more. There have been some Targaryen things to come through here, the Volanten admitted. But not what you might think. Then what? Viserys asked, pointed. Banners from the rebellion, soaked with the blood of Crownlander men. Ashes from Summerhall. My brother's silver harp. Rocks. The prince looked back at him with surprise. Rocks. Closer to pieces of brick in truth, Rhaegar explained, soothing the Targaryen's temper with every word. Harrenhal was the last true demonstration of a dragon's fury. It is as much a testament to the power of your forefathers as there are to Valyria itself, so pieces of its burnt walls often find themselves here. There are many fakes. One merchant tried to pass off a piece of Storm's End as a piece of Harrenhal, but if one has the eye to recognize the marks of dragon fire, they can find true pieces. And then Rhaegar smiled. I myself have a piece in my own home, about the size of a fist, he admitted. Hewn from the Kingspire Tower during the tourney of Harrenhal, where your brother Rhaegar crushed the opposition well enough that no one noticed men taking hammer and chisel to the brickwork behind them. You must realize, this is the closest many Volantens will ever come to seeing the dragons of the Freehold with their own eyes. A dozen of them may have dragon eggs of their own, bought over the centuries, yet none hatch. There are dragon eggs here. Truly? Viserys asked before smiling. I suppose if there was ever a place for them to be found outside of Westeros, it would be here, wouldn't it? All things Valyr are to be found here, and few things are more treasured than those to do with dragons, Rhaegar continued. Triac Laerion has a full set of armor from Tiosh, wrought for a dragon that simply never came. Some amongst the freeholders even buy wyverns from traders that dare to make the visit of Sotorios, so that they might feel for themselves what it might be like to hold a dragon's hatchling on their arm. Such things are frowned upon now, though. The beasts have begun to grow wild in the city, hunting mice and rats and dogs. Yet as they walked through the empty square of what was mayhaps once the greatest market in the world, its spaces for stalls given over to gardens, he noticed that there was one space that was not empty, a single tent in the lonely street. It was a large one, a great pavilion of a red as dark as blood, teardrop banners gently wavering in the windless evening, marked with nothing but the crimson cloth from which they were cut. "That tent is Mayra's tent," Roygan explained, a hint of uncertainty creeping into the voice captain of the Black Walls. "She has no interest in offering her services outside the Black Walls, lest she find herself attacked for them. More, the Triacs have no interest in letting her do so, either." "And who is this Mayra?" the Targaryen prince asked, intrigued. "She is the last of a very powerful, very ancient lineage," came the answer, quiet and contemplative. "She is the last of the blood sorcerers, whose powers were so great in their time that they could be found in the retinue of every one of the lords freeholder. Even your forefathers would have surely had one of their number in their ranks, mayhaps a dozen or more. You would be wise to see her talents for yourself." "A blood sorcerer?" Viserys asked, uncertain. "Why would I ever wish to go near her?" "Because she can see things," he answered, even more quietly. "Many things. Things that should be impossible to see, and because despite the title she is not nearly the woman you might think her to be, though that makes her all the more unsettling for it. All of the Triacs speak with her before engaging on any uncertain path because of it." Viserys swallowed, looking towards the pavilion. It was innocent looking enough, but so was a block when it was not being used to separate the heads of guilty men from their shoulders, and at least that was no threat to a man's immortal soul as so dark a magic might be. Few men with their sanity intact should want to go within, and yet, what Roygan said was true. His forefathers had made use of blood sorcerers, and they had served a vital part in the freehold. Not simply in the more obvious ways that their powers might be applied, but as communicators, diplomats and advisors. Their profession had been a feared but respectable one in those days, but more, could Viserys allow this chance to meet with one to pass him by? When he had need of every advantage. When this one moment might yet be the difference between victory and defeat. He swallowed. Had there ever truly been a choice to make? "Will you wait for me?" he asked, turning towards the tent. "So long as you don't take too long," Roygan answered, finding a nearby bench to sit upon. "Though do not mind if I don't follow you in." "I shan't be too long," Viserys said honestly. "I wouldn't want to be in there for long," he thought as he started to make his way towards it, walking down the street towards its veiled moor, where a thick red curtain hung low, blocking all light from within. But, for Westeros, for Dany. He took a deep breath. Then he stepped forward. 1 step. 2 steps. 3 steps. The tent grew closer and closer, the calling of the hairs on his neck ever louder. What monsters might lie within? What horrifying secrets might lurk in its mistress's memories? What nightmares could be unleashed upon him? For Daenerys, came a thoughtless echo. Do it for her. His hand found the cloth's edge, parting it, and the prince stepped through into the warmth and brightness beyond. And the tent within was a place far unlike anything he had expected. Where he thought there might be corpses piled left and right, there were simple crates or boxes, concealed beneath thick white blankets to keep whatever was within safe from rain and the cold. Where he thought there might be a fountain of steaming crimson to fill the room with the stench of iron, there was a simple table, unintrusive in shape and decor, neatly arranged with candles and cups and a bottle of wine. Where he thought there might be tomes written in strange scripts that hurt the eye to see and twisted creations that lurched around crying tears for an existence that should never have been, the only sign that this was a tent belonging to a blood sorceress at all was mayhaps the simple black spire upon the table's surface, a black so dark that it ate the light around it, shining little and consuming all. That was a dragon glass candle, he knew. Of its powers he knew less. It was said by his father that Visenya Targaryen, the first of the Conqueror's 2 brides, had used one to peer into the lands of Westeros and determine the strengths of each of the kingdoms, but even the Maestas knew of how the dragon lords of old had made use of them, though what was true and what was naught but rumor no one truly knew. Could they truly peer into the minds of men, woken or dreaming? Its mistress was not far, for where he thought he would find an old crone, her back hunched over and misshapen and her hair thin and twisted, there was a beautiful young woman, draped all in white from head to heel, the very same white as the silver hair of her Valyrian blood, humming with a voice like birdsong as she cradled a sleeping cat, the little black creature resting comfortably against her body as her right hand's fingers slowly moved across the parchment of a book, feeling the imprint of every letter from the mark where the quill was pressed down against its surface years before. Her face was heart-shaped and soft-cheeked and lipped, conjuring old memories of that woman who had been at the court of his father for years as his good sister's handmaiden, Ashura Dane. Yet there was something different about the woman that was sat before him now on the far side of that table, something he could feel simply by gazing upon her. It was as if she radiated an aura of soothing gentleness, as calming and relaxing as the crackle of a warm fireplace in the dead of winter or a mother's embrace. It was a comforting thing, something that grew only all the more so by the sweet sound of her humming, yet it was even more unnerving for it. Here was a blood sorceress, a practitioner of the very same art that the Gogososi had used to mate man and beast together to produce inhuman abominations for their fighting pits, a woman of the art rumored to be able to rip the thoughts from a living man's mind, and here she looked as innocent as his own sister, utterly harmless and filled with naught but love for the world. Never in his life had he felt so uneased. "There is nothing to be scared of, Your Grace," she said, looking towards him with a smile and white eyes. "I mean you no harm." "You can't see?" he asked, stepping into the tent proper. "How can you tell who I am without seeing?" "One doesn't always need eyes to see, good Targrio," she answered instantly, gently taking the cat in her hands and placing it on the ground, the Tom purring happily and affectionately as she stroked the back of his neck. "Please be careful around carts this time, will you? I don't want to have to mend you again." She took her hand away, the little black Tom looking towards her with grateful attentions before slipping out the side of tent, not caring to bother with the flap that Viserys had came through and simply pushing through the skirt and out into the evening city. Closing the cover of her book and moving it to the side, atop one of the crates, the blood sorceress looked towards him with a laugh. "Lovely cat, but what he has in sweetness, he must be lacking in wits," she smiled. "He always keeps getting himself hurt in the silliest ways." "A crushed tail?" Viserys asked, curious. If only it was so easy. He was near enough crushed in half by an ironmonger's cart whilst running after a mouse. The prince looked back at her, surprised. "But he just..." "Indeed he did," Mayra answered. "I am sure you are more aware than many that fire and blood can mend many, many things that others would call impossible. 7 kingdoms, for example." He almost couldn't believe what he was hearing or seeing. Was this a glamour? Was this truly a blood sorceress? Had Rhaegar taken him for a fool and sent him to a mummus witch? What in the name of the 7 was going on? "I take it you didn't step into my tent simply to make conversation, though?" Mayra asked, leaning back into her seat. "Very, very few people come in here without a reason, and I am sure you have one as well." Viserys straightened himself. As surprising as this might be, as strange as it might be to have the witch he thought to be a crooked old crone to be but a normal woman, he stepped forward. This was not something he could afford to be afraid of, not when he had a realm to reclaim. Fear was a boy's thing, a prince's thing. Viserys was a man grown and a king both. "I do." "Then please," the sorceress said, offering him a seat on the other side of the table and leaning forward, head on hands as ringed fingers rested on her wrists. "Tell me what you would like me to do for you this fine evening." Viserys swallowed, yet he sat before her, looking back towards her milky eyes and feeling all the more unnerved by the experience. He forced those feelings outside. Daenerys. All he did for her. What difference did it make if what he did for her was to escort her from one city to the next or visit a blood sorceress? "What is it that you might do?" he asked with quiet, almost restrained words. "I am sure you know what I am, good prince," she almost giggled, like a girl playing at being a lady. "I am master of the body, and not in the way the Braavosi or Lysan courtesans might claim to be. Say but the word, and I can make the bones of your cheeks and face shift and move and make it so that even your own mother would not be able to recognize you. You would not be the first Westerosi I gave this service. Mayhaps you would not wish to look like a Targaryen at all, and simply wish to start over, away from threats and danger," she asked, reaching out to his cheek with a soft hand and softer fingers, feeling the lines and curves of his face before he shied away. "I could easily make you look more Roynish. You are part Martell, after all, and it is easier to work with one's body when their blood already carries the look, even if it does slumber. Otherwise, I could easily move your chin and nose and brow to give you a more Andal look once I darken your eyes to blue." She continued, pondering, her fingers sliding down to his chest, examining the muscles there before moving over to his shoulders. I could make these swell. I could make you broad-chested and strong, with such strength that no Targaryen has had for centuries. Is that something that might interest you, good prince? To have the raw strength in your hands to crush the usurper's eyes and head between your hands, to be a mountain of muscle and sinew? I don't want any of that, Viserys said. I want to know anything that might help me return to Westeros. I could do that without using my glass candle. Mayra laughed. I assume you are going to be speaking with the Triacs tomorrow. That is my hope. Then let me give you a little advice, the blood sorceress continued. Don't call it Westeros, the Andal name. Call it Vesteos, the High Valyrian name. The former will make you seem like you have forgotten your roots and heritage. The latter makes you seem Valyrian. Useful advice, Viserys knew and accepted. Another little remark is not to concern yourself much with magical things, as I am assuming you came in here for, she said with a playing look on her face. Sorcery can do many things, more than you might think. It is a key that can open many doors, yet like most keys, you would find it rather unsuited for, say, showing a horse. Valyria did not conquer with sorcery alone. You will need armies to take Vesteos. I hope to get them from your own Triacs, he nodded. Is there anything you could do that might help? Many things, Mayra answered, before adding, few of which I would be allowed to do, seeing as they are Triacs and help pay for my dinners. Then she paused as an idea came to mind. But, I suppose, no, I am not sure you would want to. What? He asked, hands on the table. Whatever it is, I wish to know. The only way I can show you is with this, she said, gesturing towards the glass candle with the tip of her hand. Would you like to see? I will, he insisted. If it can help me return home again, then I would do it 1,000 times. Even though it is blood magic, she teased. I would pay any price. Are you sure? She asked, the tiniest hint of playfulness slipping into her voice. Truly sure. But of course, Viserys replied, smiling even though she couldn't see it. Besides, I have never had the chance to see a glass candle truly work. They don't work nearly as well as they once did, Mayra admitted, rising from her seat to reach towards one of the blanketed boxes that helped support either side of the room and played the part of shelves, her hand slipping through the cloth to grab something within, something that squeaked with surprise at the touch of her fingers. But they do work still, even if they are a lot more stubborn than the ones of our great-great-great-grandfathers, to be sure. Her hand emerged, and in her gentle grip was a little grey mouse, looking around at the world with curious eyes and wiggling in her hand, yet not in the slightest bit afraid. No, it was comfortable, sure it was safe in her hands. Mayra smiled at the feeling of its little movements, reaching with her other hand to brush through its fur before reaching down to the table and through the various bowls and plates to find a hefty morsel of cake for it to eat, the little mouse cheeping with delight as it took a bite, chewing away eagerly, its mistress mimicking the sound before laughing. He's adorable, Viserys laughed for himself. He is, isn't he? Mayra asked, smiling as her hand reached for a nearby dagger on the table's top, a mercigiver, a needle-thin stiletto that could slip through the gaps in a knight's armor to pierce the heart within. I bet his fur is white like snow. Mayra took the blade, and before the Targaryen could react, before the realization could even dawn on him, her hand moved so fast as to be almost a blur and so precise that the mouse didn't even realize what was about to happen before it struck, alive one moment and dead the next, so quick it still had a mouthful of cake held in its fat cheeks. Then Mayra, never once losing her cheer, never once hesitating for a moment, opened it utterly on the blade's tip, squeezing the body over the black candle's crystalline tip, squeezing the blood from it, squeezing the essence from it, all pouring down in a rain of crimson, whispering words in a tongue he could not know. And by the gods, old and new, the candle burned. It was crimson. It was violet. It was white. It was black. Gold. Red. Blue. Every color at once. No color at all. Colors without color. Colors which the eyes burned to see. Colors for which there were no name. Colors that threatened to drive him mad. He closed his eyes, recoiling as the after-image burnt into his eyelids. They were places. Forests. Skies. Fires. Cities. Each and every one, mingling with the others, like ink swirling in water, melding into a tendriled maelstrom of madness, clutching and clawing for his attentions. Through it all the blood sorceress spoke a tongue he had never heard before, or at the very least could not understand, singing the words, singing a choir of 1,000 voices, 1,000,000, the prince clutching at his head, his temples pounding, pounding, a battleground of lands beyond lands, worlds beyond worlds, all times, all places, all things, all that is and was and could be and could have been and might yet be, and warmth, soft, soothing warmth. "You can open your eyes now," Mayra said, her voice bringing order to chaos and bringing with it the sounds of city, of wind, of distant water and a summer's breeze. "Your eyes will hurt for a while, but it'll fade." Viserys blinked, feeling the ungodly ache melting from his sight as rays of piercing sunshine flooded his eyes, the prince wincing as his vision adjusted. Had it not been night, but a heartbeat ago, he couldn't help but think as he shielded his senses. What had she done? What in the name of the gods, old and new and Valyrian and all the other gods in the world, had he just seen? "You're nearly there." He blinked again, trying to focus his eyes. The pain was going, just as she said it would, but it was a pain the likes of which he had never felt before in his life. He had felt the pain of cuts and burns and scrapes and bruises and choking. Those were pains of the body. He had felt the loss of a brother and a father and a mother, all gone a matter of months apart. That was a pain of the heart. This was something else, something new, something men might go their whole lives without ever once encountering. This was the pain of a mind that couldn't begin to grasp the things that he had seen, glimpsed in the place between places, the pain of a mind trying its best to know something that was by its very nature unknowable. Yet he pushed his way through it, as he had all the other pains, letting it fall away from him till at last he opened his eyes and could see once more and gazed out to see the shining warmth of the sun before noon, bathing the land beneath in its comforting light where before there had been naught by the gently rippling cloth of the blood sorceress's tent. Before him, as far from him as the cages and crates had been, was a railing, a half-wall of black stone that was not marked by the hammered marks of chisels or the lines of mortar, but formed in a single piece, as dragonstone was, and the prince stepped forth with trembling legs to see the sorceress gazing out upon what lay beyond, waving him over with a look of utter contentment upon her as he came to see, to see. 7 hells, he muttered in his awe. A city. It was a city that he had never seen before in life, never, not in Westeros or in Essos or in his wildest dreams, for it was a city like none other. To his left and to his right and in front of him it sprawled, covered in buildings that stood as cousins to those in Volantis, to Dragonstone, yet grander, grander, like a father compared to a son or a mother to a daughter. It was a city that he gazed down upon from his place upon a mountainside, a place where he stood amongst beautiful swirling statues of dragonkin, gods and heroes alike, the slope sculpted into hundreds of terraces, home to manses and palaces and temples and countless other places that shared common blood with those below him, with those that were far beneath. Great walls of perfectly fused black stone, tall and proud and well built with perfect straight lines on perfect straight streets of that very same material, carefully planned and carefully built so as to pass the man-made rivers of water that flowed through the city's midst, fed not by the waters that flowed down from aqueducts that led into the city's breast from the mountain tops and from distant lands, but from the waters of the bay that dominated the western side, where grand ships with sails as white as silver came to and fro. All this lay within a bowl of mountains. 14 of them stood all around in a circle and stood guard around what was surely the greatest city in the world, a place that could boast proudly as being the home to millions upon millions. Yet for all the souls that surely dwelled within, the city looked to have none of the rot that had infected King's Landing in its youth, no shanties outside its walls, no flea bottom filled with brutes and the destitute and the sick. Order reigned supreme here, and where he might look to see such weaknesses of the city he instead found great buildings, 4 floors in height and yet of the same black stone as the rest of the city, the very same concept as the apartments of Maegor's Holdfast, yet vaster in scale. Even there did he see gardens dotted with statues, canals dotted with boats bringing goods from the port to the market that sat there, every inch of it covered in stalls and people whose silver hair he could see even from his vantage point, so far away. The pattern became obvious, then, 14 mountains, 14 great roads that led to them, meeting in the center where an enormous monument stood, proud for all to see, of a dragon of 14 bodies and 14 sets of wings and 14 heads, one gazing down each and every road, 14 banners fluttering at their feet, each and every one of them identical. The city was a web, that much was obvious, but it was not identical. Some parts bore the chimneys that were the mark of craftsmen of countless professions, thousands of them working within the city's breast and thousands more near the docks, building ships of every kind, from pleasure barges to merchantmen to war galleys. Some parts were places of commerce, where every good imaginable, every item to be found under the sun, could be found in a single place, filled by throngs of men and women and children alike. Some parts were more lavish, almost royal, yet they flew no banners from their walls or from the golden domes that were their roofs or from the towers that rose besides them, every floor marked by a ring of gold around their midst, growing from their corners. It was the noise that broke him from his daze, for he had only looked downwards, towards the earth. The noise brought his attentions upwards, towards the sky. It was a howl. It was a roar. It was a cry of fright. It was the noise of a dragon. It was the noise of dragons. It was the noise of 100 of them, some with riders and some not, dancing through the clear skies. They were playing with one another, teasing and chasing and having mock battles, some even seeming to laugh or chirp as they did, comfortable and happy. That was enough. He had never seen this city with his own eyes, yet he knew what this place was from that one thing alone. There was not a single one of its sons or daughters from Westeros or the Free Cities or anywhere across the world that would not be able to name it from that description alone. Mayra, he asked, looking to her to see the winds fluttering through her silver hair. Is this? It is, she answered, smiling innocently and looking to him as if she could truly see him for the first time before reaching out over the railing with a hand outstretched, as if to try and touch the world below. This is Valyria. Viserys stood with mouth half agape. How could that be? How could he be able to stand there and see it with his own eyes, to feel the winds blowing through his hair, to hear the sounds of bustling life below and the games of dragons above? Had the Doom not vanquished Valyria utterly, destroying the city that had been, for millennia, the heart of the world? How could this truly be the city? How? Were her magics so powerful that she could take him there, to a world 400 years gone? Or was it simply an illusion, a mummer's show wrought by glass candle alone? He had to ask. How? The prince spoke with a voice little higher than a whisper, the blood sorceress resting against the railings with arms crossed, peeking down at the capital of the freehold. Though Valyria was destroyed, and had rivers of fire. A dragon glass candle lets you see many things, was her answer. Even things that don't exist anymore. This is Valyria as it was some 600 years ago, long before the Doom, and as for the rivers of fire. The blood sorceress laughed. You must have only seen Valyria as her enemies and the jealous would imagine her to be, she said, warm. This is what Valyria truly looked like. It wasn't a place of pure fire, like the Westerosi Maesters like to think and how the Septons preach. They made it into that because it fits their view of how the world should be, with what they think of as evil people coming from evil lands. It fits the songs better, doesn't it, if the cruel dragon lords with their mastery of flame comes from a land burnt and ravaged, even though the Maesters themselves acknowledge that they were shepherds first. Viserys couldn't help but laugh in answer, and the sorceress smiled all the more for it. No, this is the land of the long summer, she said, waving towards the city sprawling beneath. Winter never dared to tread here. Not once in the 5,000 years the freehold stood did winter come to this land. It was the land where the flowers never stopped blooming and the crops never stopped growing. For 5,000 years did Valyria stand atop the world, filling the world with light and civilization, Mayra said dreamfully, looking down the hills as if she could see the city with her own two eyes. It was a light Valyrians took with them wherever they went. They built roads, fortresses, cities. They policed the lands they took, kept them clear of brigands and raiders both, so that any merchant, any man or woman or child, could travel for thousands of miles without escorts and without fear. Everywhere, they brought law, she continued, pointing towards another building on the opposite side of the city, on the opposite of the 14 flames, a great domed place of 14 towers, built onto the mountainside on steps so grand it was as if they had reshaped the mountain itself, every level home to different buildings and different organs of the freehold, dedicated to the different parts of its governance, every tower playing a different part. That's the whole of the freeholders, where the freehold was ruled and where the Triarchs would settle important matters, not in battles as Magisters or Westerosi or anyone else might, or through assassinations, but by debate. 3 of the towers are for them, but others are for lawyers, treasurers, governors, generals. You can see here? Viserys asked. Yes, she said, honest and smiling. In the light of a glass candle even the blind can see. But I have seen this land so often to know the place of every building with nothing more than the warmth of the sun on my face. I couldn't help but come back here, every time I could. She quietened, then. It was what took my sight, she admitted, quietly. To gaze into a glass candle is to see things that should never be seen. The thread of which the world was woven was not meant for mortal eyes. But I don't regret trading it for the chance to gaze upon these golden spires. Not in the slightest. Oh, Valyria. He saw the glittering mark of a tear upon her cheek. Valyria was special, she said with a cracking voice. When Valyria fell, the whole world fell with her. The Dothraki came out of the east, the free cities fought one another, the dragon roads became unsafe, pirates filled the seas, libraries burnt, so many of her achievements were lost. It was like Valyria and her sisters of Oros and Tyria had never truly existed. The doom was a tragedy, he echoed, looking down. The city was not just ordered, it was beautiful. Clean streets, clean houses, clean peoples. Grand architecture everywhere he looked, great and small. Golden domes and steps. There was not a man in the world who would not be able to look upon it and not see Valyria's splendor. It was, she said, before letting out a sad sigh and forcing a smile on her face again. But so long as Volantis stands true to their ideals, then the freehold still lives in our laws, our elections, our belief that no one is born with the right to rule. Even the tongue we talk keeps the dream of Valyria alive. The doom destroyed the greatest city that the world has ever seen, but even it couldn't kill an idea. You can't kill ideas. You can't stab them with swords, or shoot them with arrows, or burn them with dragon fire. And with that, she stood straight again, a hint of pride on her face. So as long as even one of us still lives to remember what Valyria was, what it truly was and what it truly stood for, then Valyria will never truly die, she said, looking down at the city before facing him again with white hair and white eyes. Before reaching out, and tapping him on the chest, over his heart. But we'll live on, in here, forever. That's why Volantis is going to. There was the howl of a dragon before she might have a chance to finish, and Viserys looked to the source to see. You won't ever catch me, shouted a woman, laughing as she blurred past, her violet dragon mount swooping around to curve past the towers, banking as her silver braid glittered in the light. I'll be past Vigor's flame before you're anywhere close. We'll see about that, came a man's shout in answer, as amused as the woman had been. After her, Lylthrax, and quickly. That woman has stolen my heart. He looked to his left, seeing a blur of white descending as fast as its wings might carry it. This was his chance. This was the chance to do something that Targaryens had been trying to do for centuries. This was his chance to do what his great-grandfather had died for at Summerhall. He had to have it. He had to do it. He had to. He would never be able to forgive himself if he didn't take the chance now, and so he reached out, and for the briefest of moments, for but a heartbeat, he felt it on his fingertips. Hot and as strong as steel, yet as supple as any leather, burning his fingers in its passing. Dragon scale. He barely had the chance to register the sensation on his fingertip before it was replaced by pain, before the dragon had gone onwards with its master, but even that small moment to feel it in its passing was worth the pain and more, so much more. Dragons were the very reason for the existence of the seven kingdoms that he laid claim to with every breath he drew and every beat of the heart that lay beneath his breast, its every thump a cry of defiance to Robert Baratheon and the rest of the usurpers that had stolen the Targaryen birthright. It was a right that was theirs because of their dragons, because of how Balerion the Black Dread had forged the Iron Throne on the battlefield and in the Red Keep, both, its ebon flames welding together kingdoms that had never before been united beneath one banner just as easily as it did their blades. Dragons were what had made the Targaryens powerful, both in Westeros and at Dragonstone and millennia before, in Valyria, where they stood alongside the other 40 families with dragon mounts of their own. It was by dragon's wings that the Targaryens had rose, it was by dragon's flame that they had done what had never before been done, it was with dragon's roar that they had brought peace to a land that had never truly known it, and it was by the loss of those dragons that they had fallen, a long and dark path that had led to his flight. Dragons were the symbol of his line, their very reason to be, but too many of them had died in the madness that was the dance, from which their numbers never recovered. Smaller and smaller did they come, till there was but one last, a tiny and scrawny thing, sickly and weak and with wings that had never formed properly, ribs of bone with no flesh between to catch the air and to let it soar as its kin might. It was a far cry from the beasts of the past, from dragons such as Vigor and Meraxes and Balerion and the older and greater yet mounts of the Freehold, who were rightly revered as a gift from the 14 beneath, returned always to the flames so that they might return to the gods that had made them and take their place at their side once more, yet it was a dragon all the same. And it was the last of them. Not just in the Crown Lands, not just in Westeros, not just in Essos, it was the last of the dragons anywhere, for from the Sunset Sea to the distant lands of Ashai, no longer could the sound of their roars be heard or the sight of their great wings be spotted. And yet here, in Valyria, they still flew as though the doom had never occurred. Mayhaps even one of the dragons in the skies above had a Targaryen upon its back, leading their mount in its exercise and its play alike. Mayhaps one of those dragon riders above was named Viserys, and oh, how he envied them. What Targaryen wouldn't? What man wouldn't? What person in the entirety of the world would not envy them and all that they could do? He would be able to soar over the lands all around him, over the world, with his sister and his wife at his side. He would be able to return to Westeros a hero, welcomed by the stunned masses with thundering cheers and waving banners. He would be able to defeat the Baratheon and reclaim the throne and raise the Targaryen banner over the Red Keep, as it should always be. With it, he could set aside his fears of betrayal and murder and assassination by the men and women he visited to gain support for his return to Westeros. With it, he could be a husband. With it, he could be a father. With it, he could be a king. It was the toll of a bell that shook him from his dreaming gaze. It came from the hall of the Freeholders, where great crowds were leaving the building at the end of the debate, melting with every step as the whole world he saw began to degenerate into the same, swirling mass that it had came from, falling apart at the edges as the sounds melded and the breeze flickered. "Mayra," he asked. "Is this supposed to happen?" "It is," alas, she answered with the saddest of sighs. "It means our time here is over. One person can stay longer than two, and bigger sacrifices let you stay longer, but you can't stay here forever. No matter how much I might try." She stepped close, slinking across the black stones with steps so slight it was as if she floated over, yet Viserys could not help but look out to the city for one last time, watching Valyria and all its splendor dissolve into nothingness once more. This time, he felt the same pain she felt. Why did it have to go? Why did Valyria have to fall? Why couldn't he stay here for a little longer? Why couldn't he stay and see the dragons and the Freeholders and his kin? Why did he have to go? He sighed. Better to have seen it once than to have never seen it at all, he couldn't help but think, only to look down with surprise as Mayra slid her arms around him and embraced him, white eyes closed. "Close your eyes," she said. "It'll make it easier." Viserys did as she commanded, closing his eyes as the world melted, colors and places and peoples dissolving into a slurry of things that man was never meant to see, things that work into the beams and wires and strings of a mummer's show. He might have gone mad if he witnessed it, if he didn't understand why Mayra held him. She was an anchor, the sole place of calm in the eye of the storm, the place where chaos became order and where even the greatest madness became sane. Her embrace kept his mind from daring to contemplate the depths around him, his closed eyes helping to keep it from having anything else to feed upon but the noise, the screeching cacophony of a world's unmaking, and then, silence. Awful silence, true and unquestionably absolute, where his thoughts rang like thunder, his hands squeezing the silver-haired sorceress all the tighter. Then the silence broke to the sound of fluttering cloth, and he dared to open his eyes to see. Volantis. The red cloth fluttered on all sides, the candles flickered, the cages chirped and growled and chittered, yet all that was right in an instant, as if nothing had ever happened. His arms held no one, for on the other side of the table, exactly where she had been before, was Mayra, sat behind a glass candle that was quiet and still, a thin smoke of a black so dark as to ache the eye and darken everything else around it, rising for a heartbeat before vanishing. "There," she smiled, leaning back into her seat and stretching her arms. "Safe and sound once again." That was incredible," he said, the amazement coming through his voice truly for the first time. "I had never even imagined that it was possible to do such things." "Few people can," she answered, wearing that same smile as she wore before, resting her head on her hands. "But once they see with their own two eyes what a glass candle might do, there are few who doubt it. Lands across the world can be viewed in a heartbeat, as can a man's deepest, most well-guarded thoughts and secrets. That is just the beginning of their power. And, unfortunately, what I am limited to in their use, she sighed. Magic all but fled the world after the doom. In ancient days, the sorcerers of Valyria could view lands the way we did for hours on end. Now we have not even a tenth the time they did, and it takes blood to get even that much. She raised her hand, as if knowing the question he was about to ask. Valyria and her daughters had the greatest magics in the world in their day, but I do not know what has happened to seal it away, she gave as an honest answer. Whatever it was that took magic from the world greatly weakened all things born of sorcery, even the glass candles of old Valyria. In the past, a blood sorcerer need only wave his hand and they would burst into flame. There was no need to do anything more than that. But could you view King's Landing? Viserys asked, an idea coming to mind. Could I send word to allies in Westeros? Mayhaps the latter, but not the former, Mayra answered, seeing the reaction to her cryptic answer in Viserys' surprised frown. I have viewed many places. Yeti. As high. Even southern Gagossos, to see if anything of our cousins remained there, only to see ruins and jungle and the creatures of their fleshcraft grown feral and mad. But I cannot view King's Landing. There is something there, she tried to explain, struggling to find the words for it. It is not the first place I have had trouble in. There is another in the heart of the north. The true heart. The frozen heart. The heart nestled within the heart, sleeping like a dragon within its egg, singing its song into the earth. King's Landing is the same, but different somehow, Mayra murmured, as much to herself as it was to him. There is something there as well, but... She laughed, realizing. Oh, good prince, you wouldn't be able to understand what it was even if I tried to tell you, she said with innocent amusement. I don't think it'll be a problem you will have to face, so there's no need to worry yourself about it. After all, it wasn't bothering you before you came in and it won't bother you after you leave, so why make a fuss about it? No, that's nothing you need trouble yourself with. I suppose you are right, was the prince's reply, rising from the seat once more. Thank you, for showing. Home. Home, he smiled sweetly at the thought. It means a lot. The Triacs will like it, if you tell them that you have seen the city for yourself, she nodded, explaining. It is what separates Volantis from Myr, Lies and Tioche. We still remember where we came from and keep to the Freehold's ideals. They no longer do. Thank you again, the prince thanked with grateful words, turning towards the flap and pressing it open to exit. Oh, and... The blood sorceress spoke with hesitation, uncertain of whether to continue. The very thought made Viserys freeze. Could possibly cause a blood sorceress of such power to make crippled animals walk again to hesitate? What could make any woman versed in the ancient arts of the Valyrian freehold, able to view the past and the present and all the futures that might yet come to be hesitate? What could unsettle a woman who had glimpsed upon Valyria, queen of all cities, and be so dark as to? I don't suppose you have an orange, she asked with an almost shy hesitation, flared with a hint of hope. What? I like oranges, Mayra smiled sweetly and innocently again, just as she had when he first came into the tent. She looked nothing like the blood sorceress she was, nothing like a mistress of one of the darkest forms of magic to be found in the world. She looked like but a woman. Do you have any? I'm sorry, Viserys apologized. I haven't. Oh, she piped in a sigh of disappointment. People usually bring me a few when they come. I used to go to the Orange Shore to pick some myself, but after I lost my sight, maybe next time. I will try, Viserys answered, a smile on his face even if she couldn't see it. I best go, as the captain of the Black Walls says that I need to make an appointment at the Freehold for tomorrow. Don't feel singled out about it, the Magi answered with a wave of her hand. They make me do the exact same thing. Even you. Even Magi are not exempt from needing to work the wheels of a freehold, she japed. For good reason, I suppose. Giving no one an exception is what makes it work. Just remember that they aren't making you write on parchment because they don't want you there, but because they must. Viserys laughed, and once more he turned to the cloth. Oh, she said at last in half-remembrance, causing the prince to look back before he could pass through the cloth. There was something else. What? "Congratulations on becoming a father," was the blood sorceress's excited words. "I am sure Dany will be so happy to find out she is with child." Viserys froze. "How did you know that?" he asked instantly, all warmth and all kindliness melting from him, replaced by an iron heart of suspicion and defensiveness. "Promise me, Viserys," his mother whispered again. "Promise me." "How did you know what I call her?" "I know many things," Meera answered, utterly unfazed by the turn in him, by the turn in his voice, the briefest hint of the exile's resolve that lay within his royal heart. "That was but one of them. I will tell you another, if you step to the side for just a moment." Viserys looked back at her, wondering for a moment if he should do as she wished. If whatever knowledge she might give him was worth doing her command, even such a simple one. Who knew what might happen? Who knew what powers she might have? He swallowed. Then he stepped to the left. Through the tent's flap came the black cat, the exact same one from before, coming inside with something wiggling beneath its teeth, a mouse, terrified and yet alive. That was how she got them. That was where the mouse she had given to the candle came from. Reaching down to the cat with cupped hands, the Tom dropped the mouse into her waiting hands and she closed them quick, catching it, trapping it, then quickly reached to the exact same crate she had taken the first mouse from and let him fall inside, ready for some future sacrifice. "You were stood on the tent cloth, so he couldn't get in," Meera said, petting the black Tom again as it purred happily at his mistress. "Would you like to know something, Viserys Targaryen?" He didn't even have the chance to give her an answer. "You are a man full of doubt about the man you are and what the Targaryens of the past would think of you," Meera said. "Don't. You will be a greater dragon than any of them ever were." Thank you. I will remember that when I take my throne. Who knows, mayhaps I shall follow you dragons to Westeros." Meera laughed, finding a cup on the table full of wine. It might make a pleasant change in scenery. It took a moment for him to realize what she had just said, what she had meant, but the prince burst into laughter before finally making his way through the cloth and into the outside world once more without interruption. The sky had grown darker still since he had entered, darker and yet brighter for all the stars twinkling overhead, the night well and truly begun, yet Rhaegar remained out there, pondering his thoughts till he noticed the prince once more. "I was beginning to wonder if you might ever emerge," the captain of the Black Walls rumbled as he rose from the seat, ready to continue. "I trust you haven't been bled so much I will need to find a healer, lest you fall on the steps and break your neck." "Thankfully not," the prince said with a smile as they started back on their journey, the prince letting the captain lead. "She seems sweet and innocent enough, does she not?" Rhaegar asked, seeing the answer on the Targaryen's face before he might say it himself. "She is, and she gives little sign that she is mayhaps the most dangerous woman in the world." "How so?" Viserys asked. "Her glass candles are incredible, but they seem harmless enough." "You forget what she is," Rhaegar said. "She is a blood sorcerer. Glass candles are only the beginning of her arts, the very same arts that were practiced at Gogossos. Flesh smithing is the word I believe the Andals used for it, and it is fitting, for she can work skin, muscle and bone the way a smith might work iron. She can heal wounds and make the crippled walk again, even mend the ailments of the unborn so that those who might never live can leave the womb, healthy and strong." Then the guard quietened. But at the same time he said, near a whisper, "She can breed the creations that sorcerers of Gogossos once did. Mate man and beast and bring forth monstrosity. That is not the most dangerous of her gifts, not nearly. Her greatest power is the power to make pestilence. She can make diseases. She can make plagues, the likes of which should not be known to man," Rhaegar answered. "The sorcerers of Gogossos fell to a disease of their own making, some say, something that made the skin fall off their bodies like wet parchment. 9 in 10 of all the people of that city died begging for death. The rest of the world was spared such a fate solely by the simple fact that the island was too far from traders. Had that not been so, the rest went unsaid, for there was no need for it to be said. Had the plague that ravaged the Gogossoi reached a trade port, it would have spread across the oceans on plague ships that would have seen it travel as far east as Yeti and beyond, just as it would spread across the roads to reach the most isolated, remote land, and bringing death wherever it went. How many could have died? Thousands, mayhaps even hundreds of thousands. Millions upon millions, with whole kingdoms being utterly wiped out. how would that not have been an ending of the nations of man across the world? They spoke little more than that, little more as they passed through a near mirror of the streets they had gone through before, craftsmen, commons, gardens. Yet these were not true manses. These were buildings of entirely different kinds, buildings where the banners of other realms might fly. He saw the city standards of Myr, Tiosh, Lies, Bravos and more flying near one another, permanent residences for their ambassadors, needed with the lack of ravens and other such things in Essos. There was one that he didn't recognize, however, a banner that soared at half-mast on the 10th building, with a dragon and chariot of gold on its cloth, placed in opposite corners and yet with riders gazing towards one another. "Whose banner is that?" he asked. "Sonia." "That is the banner of the 10th Free City," Volantis' lost little sister Roygan answered, grim. "The rest of the world may have forgotten her, but we have not. They were more like us than the others, and they will be avenged, when the time is right." It felt like they walked in silence for another 10 minutes after that, but then, at last, he saw it. The Free Hall. Though it was less than its true parent in Valyria had been, less than the whole of the freeholders he had just seen with his own 2 eyes, it was unquestionably a grand structure in its own right, as large as the dragon pit of King's Landing had been, and just like its Valyrian mother, it was place of domes. 14 towers and 14 wings jutted from a vast, square central structure, a reflection of the freehold of which it had been a part, and dome upon dome rose above, for that held up a single one whose golden summit rose into a bell tower that would sound to call the freeholders on every day of meeting. It was forged of the same seamless masonry as Dragonstone, as Valyria, and every corner of its 14 points bore the image of one of the 14 gods, Balerion the huntress, Vigor the warrior, Myraxes the artist, Syrinx of the sea. All 4 were there, as were their 10 kin, all of them surrounded by choirs of dragonkin and all of them with vast wings that were the walls of the towering structure. It was the largest building he had ever seen in his life with his own 2 eyes that was not ruined or of the past. It was even larger than the Red Keep, for where the Red Keep was many different buildings, this was one, and it felt as if there was a symbolism in that, subtle and yet there, as subtle as how the Maestus once wrote of how the 7 kingdoms are, instead of how the 7 kingdoms is as they did after Jaehaerys the Wise truly took 7 realms and made them one. Yet there was one great difference that separated it from the capital of Westeros, one difference the likes of which that would have been unimaginable across the narrow sea. It was forever open. Even now, in the dead of night, it was open and ready for petitioners to make preparations for the following morning. Even now it was ready, its doors kept open and more a feature to protect the building from poor weather and the wind than to keep anyone out. It was a striking difference from the places of Westeros, for the Red Keep was exactly that, a keep, a fortress, a place that was meant to be kept closed and defended and guarded by design. The Free Hall was the opposite, open and welcoming, with a place for every man and every issue beneath its domes, and it was up its steps they climbed, Roygan seeming filled with pride by every foot he placed in front of the other. "I see you are impressed by the Free Hall as much as I was, when I first laid my eyes upon it," Roygan said quietly as they climbed the steps, filled with what seemed to be half-contained excitement. "It is beautiful, isn't it?" "It is, but I would rather see it in daytime." "You will get your chance," the captain laughed. "It shines like a gem when the sun is up. That makes it beautiful indeed. Come. We have forms to fill." "Is it truly that simple?" the prince asked as they stepped through the threshold and entered the building proper, where yet another great difference to the Red Keep was revealed, for where that castle had a great hall that led from the entrance to the Iron Throne itself, every step watched over by dragon skulls. The Free Hall had a small room, about the size of his bedchamber. On the left side were benches, ahead was a much grander door, the true door, that led to the hall proper, the beating heart of a true freehold, as Valyria had been, and on the right there were more benches, but more importantly, a wall. A false wall. A wall of iron bars, behind which sat a tired-looking clerk, a Volantin, hair long and eyes violet, reading silently and with nothing else to do in a dark room that was barely at all lit. "It is," Roygan answered, leading the prince to the bars, to the small opening beyond the dungeon-like grate. "And this is the one and only man with whom you need to speak." "You have a matter to discuss with the Triarchs and the freeholders?" the clerk asked, looking towards Hte Prince with tired eyes as he slid his book aside. "What is the nature of your visit? Are you here on matters of trade, diplomacy, military, or to deliver a missive?" "I am Viserys," of the House Targaryen, he said, straightening himself to full regal stature. I am here to seek allies to reclaim my throne. Military and diplomatic, then the clerk continued, weary. Is this meeting a private one already arranged, or are you in need of an appointment? This is different, the prince couldn't help but think. Is this what it was like for my father's courtiers? Surely not. I suppose the second. Have you already been given the proper forms so that your visit might be recorded? I am afraid not. Then you will have need of a paper, the Volontaire asked. One moment, then. Mind your eyes. The Volontaire rose from his seat and walked across the room, his steps masked half by darkness and half by the iron bars that separated the two and protected him from the anger of any man. But despite the lack of light, the clerk moved with practiced steps and knowledge of where every last detail was within the room with but the littlest light, making his way towards a shelf that Viserys could barely see from where he was stood, hearing only the clattering of metal and the scratchy flutterings of a piece of parchment. Steps followed towards the far end of the room, and searingly bright light flooded the chamber as he opened a door to reveal a burning fireplace that bathed the room with its warmth and revealed that, in his hand, were a set of long tongs, shaped carefully to hold the parchment in their grip. And place the parchment in them he did, carefully making sure the sheet was stretched taut between its steel fangs before the clerk carefully gripped it with both hands, as man might grip a spear, before plunging it into the flames, towards an iron block Viserys could barely see, and pulled it out again not even a heartbeat later. The parchment smoked and steamed from where the metal had scarred its surface, yet the clerk cared not as he brought it over to the table, leaving it but a few seconds before undoing the bolts and removing it, placing it upon the wood and sliding it through the armored gratings towards Viserys to allow the prince to see. From that brief moment of fire, the blank parchment was covered in burns, and those burns were letters, lines, boxes, questions. They were not perfect things, some of them were blotchy, others faint where the metal had not been heated enough to burn the pigskin or pressed enough to properly imprint. But despite those faults, despite those few errors, it had taken but a heartbeat to create something that was readable and workable both, something that was needed to support the backbone of the Volontaire freehold and its unceasing hunger for forms and letters and all the other instruments of governance. It was a thing that they had inherited from old Valyria itself, he knew, something that had led the Giscari of ancient days long past to mock the young freehold as a nation of bookish people, a land of teachers and thinkers and philosophers, not warriors, a reputation that Valyria had eagerly embraced before teaching the Giscari the lesson that their rightful place in the world was groveling on their knees, submitting before the freeholders that had outdapped, and so outfought, even their mighty armies, taking their strengths for themselves. The source of such victories was before him. Tests. Forms. Standards. Examinations. Study. Hours upon hours of study. Even dragons were useless without tactics and strategy to make use of them, and tactics and strategy were the foundations of war of all kinds. Even the brigands and killers of the Kingswood Brotherhood had known that. Simply check the required boxes, the clerk said, uncapping an inkwell and cutting off the tip of a feather to give him a fresh quill, sliding it all through the grate, speaking words that came with the tired voice of a man who had said them tens of thousands of times before. You will also need to declare an appropriate reason for your request to speak before the Triarchs and the freeholders, for consideration of the matter at hand. Should your reasoning be unsuitable, your request for a meeting will be denied and you will receive no reply. Should it be suitable, you will be notified prior to the next session and given an appointment, he continued, the prince only able to stare back at him in wordless surprise. Should you yourself be unavailable to attend, your kin may attend to speak on your behalf, assuming that they are of appropriate age and not in the midst of a legal matter. Viserys could only look to his escort in answer, his bemused expression of disbelief saying 1,000 words. Rhaegar laughed in answer. Different from how things typically happen in Westeros, I take it, the Volontaire asked. Do your people not need to submit forms to ask for a petition? Viserys asked, the captain of the guards nodding in acceptance. Most simply come up to the castle with their requests whenever the king holds court. Is there not a day he must always have it? The Volontaire clerk asked, confused. The practices of a realm with a king as alien to him as the practices of a true freehold were to the prince. And how does he determine whether a petitioner is allowed to enter or not? It is the king who decides what is meaningful enough for a petitioner to be accepted, Viserys answered. If it is something that is too low for him, then he can send them away. Some might be punished if their matter is frivolous, as it wastes his time on matters that are more important. Da with Macron Rys, the clerk murmured bitterly in High Valyrian. Indeed he is a king, Viserys answered, knowing the meaning of the word, knowing that it was one of the first his father had taught him. Or so he thought. It is not king that word means, though mayhaps it does in Westeros now, Rhaegar explained. In true High Valyrian, it means a different thing entirely. It means tyrant. Before Viserys could answer, before he even had a chance to vent the anger that began to rise at the accusation, an accusation that had been grounds for duels to the death in Old Valyria, duels fought with sorcery and blade and dragon fire, Rhaegar raised his hand with soothing swiftness, seeing in an instant the change of expression on the Targaryen's cheeks. The same term was given to the kings of Sonya, Rhaegar explained fairly and quickly. Orion of Qohor called himself such as well, even if the term better translates into the common tongue as Emporium, I think. Emperor, the clerk corrected with a wave of his hand. Daes is a term for all men who rule without the consent of the ruled. They named one of our very own triarchs, Horono, the same during the Century of Blood, may the 14 forsake him still. Horono? Viserys asked, distracted from the veiled accusation by the name and then need to fill out the papers he had been given, taking the quill and dipping it into the inkwell to start. I'm not familiar with that triarch. Most Westerosi wouldn't be, Rhaegar explained. He was a tiger, as many of us are still, and a tiger elected every year for 40 years. He brought Volantis many victories. He broke the back of Myr and marched his forces through its gates and raised the Volanten banner in its squares, stunned the Giscari with a repeat of the old wars and curbed their ambitions, once and for all, then stormed the Piers of Lies and took the city in a day, leading the men through the streets on foot. His victories in the name of restoring the freehold had made him a popular man, the clerk agreed. There was not a year that went by that he did not keep his seat with more votes than the other two triarchs combined. But the elections tired him, so he tried to use his power to name himself Triarch for life. There are few things men love more than victories, good Viserys, but one's rights is one of them. Rhaegar nodded in agreement. Horono violated those rights, and so the Volantens, even then, had each of his legs and each of his arms tied to an elephant so that he might be torn limb from limb. That alone was not enough to kill him, however, for the blood sorcerers of that time were still strong. They stopped him from bleeding to death, to make sure he could feel the pain of it all, the clerk explained. And when the pain of that was ended, they threw the limbless lump that was left of him into a pit of hungry tigers. The sorcerers kept him screaming for near enough half an hour before he was beyond even their abilities. 7 hells, the prince gasped. There are few things Valyrians took more seriously than their rights, and none are closer to being Valyria's heir than Volantis, Rhaegar said. When Horono saw fit to try and make himself Triarch for life, his acts attacked not only the rivals who might see to try and take his place, they attacked every Volanten and the rights and laws that separate us from the Dothraki. Even the dream of restoring the freehold weighs very little in comparison to destroying the dream upon which it was founded, the clerk agreed. In over 5,000 years, neither Valyria nor her Tyrian or Orosei sisters ever had a king. Even when they were still little more than shepherds, they governed as groups through councils of their wisest men and women. But that is enough talking about the past, as I myself do need to deliver something as well. Rhaegar half-japed, Viserys moving to the side to allow him to reach the table and the clerk past its armored walls. Has Triarch Laerion retired for the night? He has yet to retire, yes, the clerk answered as the Targaryen checked a box marking it as a military matter. But he has requested not to be disturbed except for the most urgent of matters so that he may make his preparations for tomorrow's assembly without interruption. I take it must be an important one. Indeed it is, the captain of the Black Walls answered. He is a Triarch, yes, but he is also Legiantis of all Volanten as entire too. All matters to do with defense of the city are to do with him. Viserys' ears perked at the sound of the High Valyrian. It was different than he had been taught by his mother and father and brother and by the Grand Maester. Older. Purer. This was true High Valyrian, untainted by the influences of the common tongues of Westeros, but even still he knew the words. Legiantis. First Commander. As entire two armies. This Triarch was not just a Triarch, he was the designated leader of all of the city's forces, whose commands went by default, even if they might be overruled by a vote amongst the freeholders themselves. That was a privilege and a power not given lightly. Then I will see it to him. Make sure you do, Roygon answered. Before reaching into his coats and into a pocket within and pulling out a sealed iron cylinder, a thing barely big enough to contain the scroll within. Capped with a thick hunk of metal that was itself covered in Valyrian numerals and GLYPHS, all connected to a mechanism that lay beneath, a combination lock. The clerk reached out for it, ready to take it from his hands, but Roygon pulled it back at the last moment. Do not attempt to open the cylinder, the captain warned. This information is beyond price. Should the wrong numbers be entered or the container be pierced, the contents will be destroyed to keep them from our enemy's hands. Only after the clerk nodded grimly did the captain of the Black Walls surrender the steel cylinder to him, never placing it on the table, never letting it out of his grip till the clerk had his hand upon it, and not even letting go until it had been pulled behind the iron bars and out of his easy reach. And only then did the Targaryen realize why the captain of the Black Walls himself had come to escort him to the free hall. Only then did he realize why he had came to him after dinner and not earlier in the day. It was not about him. It had never been about him. It had never been about Viserys and his need to speak with the Triarchs to get aid for his return to the Seven Kingdoms. Roygon had something else in mind from the moment he had knocked the door, and it was something that Lena had known about, dining and japing with him and his sister all whilst she had her own aims. And that aim was to use him as a cover for this one moment. This one message. What secrets could it possibly hold to merit such importance? News of Westeros and an opening the freeholders might exploit. News of Braavos and of the opportunity to right the defeats of 400 years before. Or was it not news, but something even more valuable? Secrets to exploit. Men to blackmail. Or mayhaps it was secrets of a kind long thought lost to the world, secrets of sorcery, secrets of knowledge, mayhaps even secrets of dragonkind. Or maybe it wasn't even a message at all. Mayhaps it was an item, like a glass candle, or something to do with Gogossos, or Ashai, or even old Valyria itself. Or maybe, just maybe, there was nothing inside it at all and it was nothing but a trap, to see if he would care or try to find out more for himself. If it was, then it was a trap he was intent on evading. A more prideful prince might have done something, tried to peek at the cylinder as it passed him by. A more prideful prince might have said something, asking about what was so important that it had to be given in such a manner. A more prideful prince might have even allowed his temper to rise and refuse to be used in such a manner, revealing the deceit. Viserys didn't look. Viserys didn't ask. Viserys did nothing. Nothing but keep his hand scribbling upon the parchment. He had his pride, let none say that he didn't, but that pride was tempered by a gift of pragmatism, given to him by years of experience. This was not his battle to fight, not his problem to solve, not his cause to die for. He had enough troubles as it was without needing to intrude on anyone else's matters. That was the key to surviving in Essos as an exile as long as he had. That was the key to surviving when the usurpers' blades were always but a heartbeat behind, following their footsteps like shadows. That was how one survived the fall of their dynasty and the loss of their throne and castle and home. They kept their attention solely on that goal and upon no other. They kept the attentions of others off of themselves, for they had no need of more enemies than they already had. And Viserys had many enemies and few friends. Across the narrow sea were a great many lords who might rise for him upon his return, but just as many were the ones that would fight to the last man to prevent him from reclaiming the throne, afraid of what he might do to them and their lines after the last of the Baratheon banners falls into the mud. The Lannisters were one of them, for Tywin Lannister had put his niece and nephew to the sword to secure the rebel victory, despite being called to arms again and again by the man who had fought and bled with him on the stepstones, by Aes, his one-time best friend and the man he had served as Hand of the King. Their treachery would have to be punished. Then there were the Arryns, who had refused a direct order from the crown to apprehend the Stark and Baratheon boys who had been there at the Eyrie as wards, despite the fact that the heir to Winterfell had shouted, in public, his desire for Rhaegar to come out and die, a threat to do harm against a member of the ruling house, a threat of regicide, a crime that bore the death penalty in the code of laws that Jaehaerys the Wise had made and had even existed before then, when the Seven Kingdoms had still been separate from one another. Their treachery would have to be punished. Then there were the Starks, who had unjustly and unfairly accused the prince of a crime that he had never committed, of acts that he would never have done, slandering Viserys' beloved brother's reputation for naught but their own error. As if that was not enough, they threatened his father, a man who had done nothing except act against those who had first acted against him, as he had at Duskendale, years before, where he could have came with an army of knights and yet came with but a single knight of the Kingsguard, confident and trusting in the loyalty of his vassal lord, trust that was repaid with starvation in a dungeon. He was not the Mad King they tried to call him. Aerys had done nothing wrong. His father had done nothing wrong. Their treachery would have to be punished. And there could be no question about the Baratheons. Once the closest of all of the dragon's allies, a dynasty that would not even exist were it not for Targaryen gratitude and generosity, they had time and time again been rewarded for their servitude, and how did they repay the Targaryens for the generosity that they were given? With blood. With fire. With usurpation. With the slaughter of their kin by marriage, for old Targaryen, the usurper's own grandmother, had still been alive during the fighting. It was said that she had passed from the grief of hearing that her grandson had killed her great-nephew, his own cousin. That was consanguicide, the murder of kin. There could be no forgiveness for that. But before he could seek out and punish his enemies, to deliver them justice for their crimes, he had to have allies. Volantis could be the greatest of them all, the centerpiece that raises the Targaryen banner for its return to Westeros. They were his last, best hope. If he was ever to avenge his family, if he was to ever avenge his beloved Aerys and Rolla and Rhaegar and even little Rhaenys and Aegon, he would need their help. He needed their help. He needed Volantis. And so he turned a blind eye to it all. He did nothing as the cylinder rested in the clerk's hands. He said nothing as the clerk weighed it in his hands, looking to Rhaegon curiously only to place it into a pocket. He needed Volantis far more than Volantis needed him, so he did and said nothing as the Volanten rose from his seat on the other side of the table to leave, to deliver it to its master. All he did was write the last few sentences, the last of his reasonings for coming to the city and seeking an audience with the Triarchy, then slide the finished sheet through, ready to be handled whilst he was gone. And on the way back to the manse, he said nothing more. The end.